I am Tamar Ish Shalom, and this is Jewish Crossroads. I am excited to have with me today Batya Ungar-Sargon. She's a journalist and author of 2 books, Bad News, How Woke Media is Undermining Democracy, and Second Class, How the Elites Betrayed America's Working Men and Women. Batya has taken quite a fascinating path from writing in progressive outlets to becoming one of the sharper critics of what she calls woke media and identifying as a MAGA leftist and an enthusiastic supporter of President Trump. What's striking about Batya is the way she talks about ordinary Americans, about class, and about how class is downplayed, ignored, or pushed out of the American conversation. She doesn't shy away from controversy, and she's one of those voices that makes you stop and think and rethink, whether you warmly agree with her or fiercely disagree. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Shalom, Batya.
Shalom, shalom. What a beautiful introduction. Thank you for having me.
How are you doing these days?
It's a very tough time right now, but I feel very hopeful and optimistic. Like the truth is going to win. But I think I always feel that way. So how are you?
Are you an optimistic? Is that you?
Yeah, yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
You've gone through a lot of political and ideological transformations in recent years. And in most personal interviews, that tends to be the focus. But beforehand, I'm curious about something else. Has the meaning of being Jewish changed for you in any way over the past 2 years?
Oh, that's such a good question. It's funny, people often say to me, "Oh, you've changed so much," but I actually don't think I've changed at all. I feel that the world around me has sort of shifted and realigned. I don't really think that left versus right makes sense anymore to describe anything meaningful. And I can't really point to views that I had like 10 years ago that I don't have anymore. And it's just funny because I'm perceived as having made this like radical shift from left to right. Like there's no opinion that I could point to that I hold right now that I wouldn't have held 10 years ago. So it's sort of a funny thing to be perceived that way. I mean, I don't consider being called a conservative an insult. And so I don't mind that people say that about me. But in the conservative movement, I'm known as the sympathetic lefty. So it's kind of a funny thing. And definitely the left has sort of kicked me out and disavowed itself of me. So they would not recognize me as of their ilk anymore. But that doesn't mean that my views have actually changed. Okay, enough with the throat clearing. I will say, I think the most interesting thing that changed about my Jewish identity was, well, I'm an Orthodox Jew. So I was Orthodox, 2 years ago. I did take a break, between high school and being raised Orthodox. And then,
A gap
you know,
year.
a gap year. It was a little more than a year. You kind of like want to find your own path in your 20s. And then, in your 30s, at some point, you just become your parents. I think it happens to a lot of us and happened to me. I would say the thing that I think changed the most was I used to feel very strongly that it was anti-Semitic to hold one Jew responsible for the actions of another Jew just because they share, an ethnicity, right? Like definitely if we were thinking about Muslims or Black people, right, we would consider that to be an obvious sign of racism. Oh, this Black person did this Black thing, therefore all Black people are like that, and therefore I can hold you, random Black person, responsible for that. And I think after October 7th, I really just don't feel that way anymore. I don't know if it's anti-Semitic or not to do it, but I am happy to be the person that people turn to explain Israel. Like I don't anymore feel, well, I can't vote in Israel. I'm not a citizen of Israel, so don't ask me to explain it because I'm an American. I just happen to be a Jew. It's like, no, come to me. I will explain to you what's happening there and why and what I agree with and what I disagree with. But I'm happy to be the avenue. And the first time I noticed that shift in me was a few months after October 7th. I was in an airport and there was a long line of people waiting to board a flight to Cairo. And one of the women saw my star and she said, she went, "Free Palestine," like that, like in my face. And I sort of chuckled to myself as I walked away because, of course, I thought, well, not if Egypt has anything to say about it, right? But by the time I got to the gate, I had realized, like, I would have considered that, an act of anti-Semitism before October 7th. But now I don't at all. Like, sure, I'm the address for that. I will explain that to you. I am the person who now identifies very strongly as pro-Israel, as in a political way, in a spiritual way. I don't consider myself Israeli in any way. I'm very proud of my Jewish identity. I get a lot of flack in my synagogue because I consider America to be my homeland, and I consider, my Jewish identity and my American identity to be very much in concert. This is the nation state that I identify with. But it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. Like, that question, I think, became very moot after October 7th in a way that really surprised me.
You've described yourself as moving from liberal to populist, and you don't see the word populist as an insult. Could you walk me through that journey? And I should say, you studied in Berkeley, you come from an educated and well-established family. On paper, all the ingredients for a possible progressive woke worldview, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the one thing that really did change about my ideology, let's say, was I was more woke. For example, I was very excited to vote for Hillary Clinton as the first woman, like more than any of her policies. I felt, women were finally arriving and, we deserved this. And, this kind of focus on identity. I think that that really shifted for me after the Me Too movement, because I do think that gender dynamics in America shifted very, very radically, which made me start to think like, oh, do women really, are we really still oppressed? Like, do we really need? And I think that that was a very interesting change that happened culturally. Um, so of course I started out saying nothing about my identity has changed, and now you ask the second question, and I'm starting to find all the things that actually have changed about my views. And now I've forgotten your question.
About you had all the credentials to be a
Yes,
woke
yeah.
person. So what happened?
Right. Well, I was raised in a frum family, and so my mom is very conservative. My father's actually quite progressive. He's a sort of NPR listener, spends a lot of time in the car, and he's sort of very bleeding heart. So we always had that. My parents have a very vigorous intellectual relationship in which they debate the issues that they don't agree on around the Shabbos table, which is something I grew up experiencing and loving very much. It wasn't like one of these families where you weren't exposed to how people disagreed or you didn't have that value of debate. We really, really did value that as a family. Even in Berkeley, I could sense that there was something very different about how I saw the world and how the people around me saw the world. There was a sort of excitement around, I would say, forcing political change over convincing people that you were right, that felt a little bit alien to me, like looking back. And then the world started to change. So when I was the opinion editor at The Forward, I started in, I believe, 2017. So in the beginning, when I would run op-eds by the left, the right would get enraged and demand that I be fired. If I ran a Palestinian, for example, who said, we ran a piece saying you can't both be a Zionist and a feminist. Like, obviously, I don't hold that view, but that is a view relevant to our community that we should grapple with. It's an interesting, not beyond the pale. I mean, it's certainly, and the right went just crazy. Like, she should be fired. How dare you? By the time I left, when I would run views from the far left, the right would say, look, this is a terrible point of view, but it's good to hear how the people who hate us think about us. That's relevant to us. That's interesting. And it was the left that was saying, fire her. How dare you run opinions that we don't agree with? Like, Israelis should not be platformed in a Jewish publication in America. Like, that shift happened while I was there between 2017 and 2020. I think I moved to Newsweek. Like, that is the kind of shift in the culture that someone like me with my personality and my upbringing and my convictions, I took the job on the condition that I would have full say over what I published, and I would publish the opinions relevant to the full spectrum of our community. That is going to impact how you see the left, especially when people who used to be your friends, used to be people that you identified with closely, people who you had hosted in your home for Shabbat meals, people whose careers you had built up by publishing them, would then denounce you publicly for publishing a totally mainstream conservative view. Like, Donald Trump's good for the Jews. Like that, saying that, which at the time, by the way, I didn't believe. I believe that now, but at the time I didn't believe it. But obviously, 35% of Jews believe that, American Jews, 100% of Israeli Jews believe that.
Well, not
Of course, that's
100%, but a large majority.
let's say 80%, something like that. Relevant to our community, but that was then viewed as a betrayal worthy of like deplatforming, canceling, public humiliation. And that is going to radicalize you. Like that is going to make you think, wow, these are not the people that I thought they were. The left is not doing what I think the left should be doing. Now, again, I still identify as of the left. I think I'm the real left because to me, the left is like FDR and, the labor movement and dignity and love of country, whatever, being anti-war, all this stuff like that to me means left. But that's not what it meant to them. It meant an increasingly radical politics which was divorced from the everyday realities of working class people because working class people in America had become Republicans. And the people left on the left in America at this point were now the over-credentialed elites. Now they're downwardly mobile because of AI. So they're saddled with student debt and they can't get the jobs that they were promised, but they still have the contempt for labor and for the working class that they were taught in university. So there's this weird thing where they're like, over-credentialed, highly contemptuous of the working class, but also now, they are proletarianized. These are not people who are going to be able to afford homes, just like most working class people. So we're in a really interesting place right now. But that resentment that really fuels the movement is like utterly alien to how I view politics and how I view what it means to be an American, what it means to be a Jew, and also what it means to be a leftist.
In an interview after October 7th, you said that the whole woke ideology was inherently bad for Jews. It's racist. Could you unpack that for me?
Yeah, well, it's obviously racist against like minorities. The beginning of my unwokening happened when I encountered a 2018 Yale study that found that white liberals, it's called presenting lower competence. They dumb down their vocabulary when they talk to blacks and Hispanics, and white conservatives don't do that. And I remember seeing that study and thinking like, this is an indictment of my entire worldview. Like to me, that is the woke movement. It's like this view, this impulse that people of color require our beneficence and our help somehow. So you don't use big words around them. They might feel bad about it, It's so appalling, but it is so if you start to look through every plank of their agenda, it's so embedded within that worldview. So I think it's clearly racist. But obviously, it's anti-Semitic as well. I think it was always sort of on a collision course with Jews. A lot of American Jews felt really shocked after October 7th because they knew our community as having been at the forefront of every liberal and left-wing cause, whether it was the labor movement or the civil rights movement or the LGBTQ movement, women's rights. These were issues that were defining for American Jewry. I mean, most American Jews, what it means to them to be a Jew, they're not religious. What it means to them to be a Jew is basically to have liberal values.
And you hear in every conversation with many friends and colleagues, which are liberal American Jews, this feeling of betrayal after October 7th.
Exactly. So they saw themselves as having been at the forefront of every one of these movements. George Floyd, they were at the forefront of the anti-racist woke stuff. And then October 7th happens and they're like, let's rally our friends who we were always there for. And they turn left, turn right, and there's nobody there. They're on their own. And literally within 24 hours, they saw the same people they had marched with going to marches in support of Hamas. I mean, can you imagine what that felt like? I mean, it was so utterly, utterly, utterly shattering, I think, at a deep level, both in terms of identity and in terms of politics. And the reason that happened is because the woke mindset, which started in the universities in the 80s and 90s and has been like completely mainstreamed because so many white collar jobs require college degrees. So all the people in the media and all the people writing for Hollywood and all the people in positions of influence in the arts and in culture and in the Democratic Party have been through this indoctrination through our universities. They've all gone through the university system, which teaches them that, we no longer see the world through the Judeo-Christian lens of right versus wrong, virtue versus vice or evil. There's no right versus wrong. There's no objective truth. What there is power. There are those who have it and those who don't have it. And the people who have it are white people or Jews or, anybody who's coded as white. And the people who don't have it are people of color, Palestinians, blacks, anybody who is considered, subaltern. And they then reascribe virtue to anyone on the powerless side of the equation. And they say that basically their skin color, their abjection is their virtue. So they cannot be judged for anything. They cannot be held accountable. They have no moral responsibilities. So when they go out and mass murder and mass rape Jews, it is the Jews' fault. Like the fault gets reassigned to the victim because the victim is white and powerful and a colonizer and thus deserved it. That is the mindset that led to the left's justification of October 7th. And the problem is that, this sounds like it should be very fringe, but there is nothing in the worldview of anybody on the progressive left today, no matter how mainstream, that can refute that. Right? Because their whole worldview is based on that binary, that new binary, that white people or Jews do not have the right to make moral judgments about people who have, quote unquote, less power.
And despite all of this and your fierce opposition to wokeness, you have a very unconventional approach to anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism on campus. Like in a nutshell, you don't think we should give it too much weight and you refuse to be impressed. Why?
I think it's being handled in exactly the right way by the Trump administration, which is to say, we're going to use the law to get our own back. I mean, Jewish students were absolutely discriminated against. What I objected to was leaning into the idea that they were unsafe. Because I've been protested by, I call them the know-nothing they thems. It's intimidating because they are soulless, because they look like zombies. They will not engage you as a human. You try to talk to them and they just look right past you. They identify with the group. It's horrifying. But they're not gonna, before Elias Rodriguez, I would have said they're not gonna pick up a gun and kill you. They're not gonna hit anybody. These people are political cowards. It was very clear from the campus protests that a lot of them were women, they, thems, people from, the Queers for Palestine community. These were not physically intimidating people. And I objected in the name of Jewish history to conveying to young Jews the idea that they were actually in danger. Now, that doesn't mean they weren't being discriminated against. They were, but there was no real physical threat to them. What there was they were being asked to study for exams while hearing their peers chanting for their genocide outside the library. And what I thought they should do is what they did do, which is sue and make a lot of money and make the lives of these institutions hell and expose them for what they are, which is just complete frauds. And I even loved it that, they had this hearing and the presidents of MIT and Harvard and Penn were revealed to be absolute psychopaths who could not condemn the genocide of Jews. And I just loved that Claudine Gay hung on to her job and then the plagiarism scandal broke out. I just wanted her to stay because I thought, how wonderful. Harvard is now being led by a serial plagiarist. The Jewish thing, it's bad, but it's secondary to everything else that's wrong with higher ed, which is that it is run by a bunch of frauds who are all plagiarists, either literally or they just regurgitate what they hear. They're not capable of original thought or any kind of moral standing. And, that is the real problem here. We are kind of a symptom of a much larger problem, which is that from this position of being total frauds, they teach a younger generation to have contempt for labor and for the most honest and hardworking Americans.
But Batya, I'd like to push back a bit on this because, American society as a whole puts a huge emphasis on safe spaces and of feeling safe. And as an Israeli, I respect that because I come from a very different culture. And when I think of Jewish kids growing up in that very protective American environment, maybe even you can call it a bubble, they're not developing the thick skin you need to deal with real hostility, even if it's not physical. So isn't it too much to expect from them? And honestly, outrageous that the burden is on their shoulders? I mean, why should they be targeted like that in campuses?
So I would disagree that most of American culture is like that. There's a certain elite culture that's very feminized and that is a lot like that. In big part because they stopped giving men jobs in universities. It's very hard to get a job
I
now if
don't
you're a
think
white
being a
man.
woman is being soft, Batya. I bear to differ.
The way women are in the workplace, definitely there's a lot more passive aggressive, that demand for the safety, the cry bully, it's the Hamas move, actually, which is to say, to do something unbelievably vile and then say, oh, but we're the weaker ones. You can't hit us back, right? Like, this is, to me, a very feminized way of attacking. It's probably very not PC to say that. I definitely know what you're talking about. I was a very sheltered American and then moved to Israel. So I experienced, that culture
Firsthand.
shock in a really big way. I think what you're pointing to is something else, which is that, yes, American Jews have built their identity around the same kind of credentialism and upward mobility that most progressives have. They are very much of that elite left wing. I'm saying, speaking generally, obviously the Orthodox community is like not like this. Obviously, there are working class Jews, but American Jews are overwhelmingly educated and credentialed. 60% of them have a college degree, as opposed to 30% of Americans more generally, which explains in large part why so many of them are Democrats. Yes, they're very much of the university system that has been so bad for America and so punishing for the very Americans, by the way, who have our backs, which is working class conservatives. So, yeah, and it's horrible for kids to have been told they will always be protected from this kind of thing and then be exposed to it because of their race. Like, yeah, it's horrible. I thought we have to cure them of this safetyism rather than leaning into it and encouraging them to still see themselves through that lens. They were being given a very tough, very immediate lesson in what the real world is actually like. Less so the real world, more so just this system that they had expected to benefit from and turned on them very quickly.
And I totally agree with you with an important message you have, and that is not to create a mirror image of woke culture. I mean, for progressive woke students, hearing a view they don't agree with is offensive. It makes them unsafe. While that's the essence, the whole point, you come to college at a young age to challenge your beliefs, to challenge your ideology. That what makes this time in life so rich and stimulating. So it's good, that this silencing trend is finally being pushed back. And it would be a mistake if we create a mirror version of it, where it's suddenly forbidden to criticize Israel, to criticize America. How do you, maintain the right balance, that discourse that America and the whole world really needs at this point?
It's so interesting to be considering that, like, right after Charlie Kirk was murdered, like while he was doing everything right, which is engaging people with viewpoints that he disagreed with. We just need more of that, I think, more of that.
I thought about you during this weekend because I just finished your book before the assassination. And your book, Bad News, culminates in the message that what America needs is much more discourse, much more dialogue with people you do not agree with, to have this exchange of thoughts, and that will bring to a better America.
Yeah, like I said, it's a tough time because one side is really embracing that and one side is not. And it's hard to you can't change the other side. You can only change yourself and hopefully the people who are influenced by you. That's a very challenging feeling to have when you want change. And it's funny, I was thinking about this a lot because I had Trump derangement syndrome for a long time, and some of the, things that cured me of it was just seeing all of this stuff from the left and thinking, well, if they're wrong about this, maybe they're wrong about that. But I remember also like quite early on, like in 2017, feeling like I was just so sick of being angry. I can't change the other side, so let me try to understand them. And then maybe if I can understand them, I won't be so angry anymore. And of course, now is the moment to do that on the left. And it's very hard because there's a lot of gaslighting going on about the facts and the reality. And because the left still controls like the mainstream media, they've lost control over the narrative. But, I've got, all the channels up and you still see them saying things that are just complete nonsense. I'll give you one example. They're trying to say there's political violence on both sides. One of the examples they bring is Governor Josh Shapiro, who was almost assassinated this year when somebody threw a firebomb into his home. He's a Democrat. So they'll say, look, there's political violence coming from the right as well. The only problem is that the person who tried to kill him was a Free Palestine kook. He was a person who said, well, Josh Shapiro was killing my friends in Palestine, and that's why he tried to kill him. So yes, a Democrat was the object of that political violence, but it was coming from the left. And he was targeted not because he was a Democrat, but because he was a Jew. And this is their example of the political violence on the right. I mean, it's just facetious, but you'll never see any pushback. I mean, they just sort of regurgitate these lies. And
Though there
because
is
they have,
obviously violence on the alt-right as well.
there is very little violent political violence coming from the right now in America. There just isn't. I mean, every example they bring is, I mean, there were no guns at January 6th. The only person who was killed was one of the protesters. I'm not defending it. I think January 6th was terrible. I don't believe in trespassing or, getting into skirmishes with police officers. I think that's bad. But to compare that to the attempted assassination twice of the president, it's facetious. Nobody believes that. And it's so amazing because they think you're not going to notice it because they're so used to controlling the narrative. So they're kind of like in this muscle memory of, well, if we just say it enough times on cable news, nobody will notice that it's a lie.
I want to circle back to Jewish identity, and I want to talk to you about victimhood. In a way, the essence of wokeness. You're either a victim with no agency or a victimizer, no middle, no nuance. And there's a lot to gain from having a victim status. Why is your advice to us as Jews to stay away from victimhood?
Well, first of all, we're not victims. We're descended from the Maccabees. Our forefathers like fought with angels and won. Like we're not victims. Like we're the Jews. We're the forever people. And I find it to be an insult to, what my family has been through to embrace that. I think it's lame and despicable and to spit in the face of Jewish history. So that's just my, on a gut emotional aesthetic level, I think it's gross and I hate it. But politically, it's suicide. I mean, the problem with the wokes is not just that they're anti-Semitic, it's that they've built a worldview that is racist and disempowering. The whole point of dividing the world into victims and oppressors is to give the victims, infinite power, so that they actually don't have to follow the rules of morality. It's to give them an extra legal status to where they can, transcend and do whatever they want because nothing is expected of them. We don't want to be given license to be like Hamas. I mean, nothing could be worse than that. We want to bring the country together as we always have. We've sort of erased the first 200 years of American existence in this country, but the idea that we were part of the left was, it only started in the 20th century. Before that, we were uniters. There were Jews fighting on both sides of the Civil War, which, okay, you could say that's divisive, but we were very much embedded in the fabric of American society. And that is what we owe it to this country to do, is to be unifiers and to be part of that stitching together of the fabric. And I just think it would be such a disaster to say, no, you put us on the wrong side of the woke binary. We're really the victims. Like, we should be allowed to get away with anything. We too should be protected from, any kind of viewpoints we disagree with, which I think is what the ADL did. And I think was a big mistake. I think there, a lot of Hollywood actors were like, wait a minute. Don't you remember the Holocaust? This is not about the Holocaust, It's about the fact that it is a godless way of thinking about humanity. And, the final point would be Jews backed the wrong pony, okay? The left hates us. And the right, yes, there are a few fringe voices who are anti-Semitic right now, but by and large, the right, the working class in this country, conservatives, they are Christians and they are evangelicals. They're not Catholics. They are people who it is in their fundamental belief system to protect the Jews and defend the Jews. We just sided with the wrong side. I don't think we should pick a side. I think at the end of the day, we should be uniters. You should vote for both parties. You should vote for whoever you like. But if we were gonna pick a side, we picked the wrong one. We picked the one that was like on a collision course with Jewish identity. And what's so frustrating about this and really unforgivable about it is you could easily imagine a world in which the left was like, okay, thinking about what to do with Israel and the Palestinians. And, they have, of course, a case. They're stateless. That's terrible. Being stateless is a big problem. But you could imagine a world in which the left said, Well, okay, we could become fully anti-Zionist, but then we would lose all the Jews because, 90% of Jews are Zionists, and Jews have been there for us like really they built the labor movement. They were there in the civil rights movement. They were there for us as gays. They were there for us as women. Like we don't want to do that. That would just be we would lose like, these people who have really showed up for us, who really big part of their identity is being on the left. So we can't do that. We can't go full anti-Zionist. Let's think of a way where we can like talk about this issue we care about while keeping the backbone of this movement, right? You can so easily imagine non-sociopaths saying that, right? Because that is the obvious non-sociopathic way to do it. Be like, okay, well, let's consult with them. Oh, most American Jews really don't like the settlements. Most American Jews are really opposed to the occupation. Most American Jews kind of want a two-state solution and feel very strongly about, Palestinian, self-determination and so forth. Let's go with that. Let's go with that stuff. Because like then we get to keep them. The obvious thing to do. And they did, of course, they did the opposite. They were like, no, we're going to pick the most extreme view and we're going to shed all the Jews and kick them all out and make sure that every Zionist knows they're not welcome here. Like it's sociopathic and it's so pathological. But again, it's not about Jews, it's about what the left has become.
And I think your advice about victimhood is really interesting in the Israeli context, because I think we tend to see ourselves as victims. And obviously, we have very good reasons after October 7th. But it's like this combination of contradictions of feeling a victim and a regional superpower. And former Prime Minister Levi Eshkol coined the most accurate expression about us in Yiddish, and that is Samson der Nebuchadnezzar, which is maybe you'll like maybe assist me in translating like Samson the pitiful or poor Samson. Is it time for
That
us
is
Israelis to
so
choose,
good.
Batya?
It's so hard because
Feel free. Feel free. I know that you're American and you never want to impose, your worldview on us
I
Israelis, but you
know,
have
and
my
I hate
permission.
when like this is so terrible of me to admit, but I'm going to say it anyway. I can't stand turning on the TV or turning on a podcast and hearing someone in a British accent like lecturing me about American politics. Like nothing makes me angrier. I'm just like, what do you know? Like, we literally fought a war to get away from your bullshit, and you're sitting there lecturing. You don't know jack shit about this country.
So let's continue to your book, Bad News, that came out 2 years before October 7th. And while I was reading it, I kept thinking, wow, you could have added an entire new chapter just about the way this war has been covered in the media from the first days until now. So if you were to write that new chapter today, what would be your main theme about the war coverage?
So, in my next book, which is coming out, I think in June, which is called The Jews and the Left, the last chapter is about this. And it's basically about how the media became the stenographers of terrorists, which is what
That's
they did.
harsh.
Yeah, were on Hamas's side from the beginning, knowingly sometimes, not knowingly other times, and why that happened. And just a direct, as you note astutely, direct through line from my first book. But thankfully, they have a lot less power right now. The American people are so disgusted with the mainstream media and the way the Democrats have handled themselves, the demonization of anybody on the right, the way that the attempted assassinations of the president were treated. They've just lost so much market share. People get their media elsewhere. And I know there's a lot of worry about young conservatives sort of dropping off in their support of Israel, but I'm a little skeptical of that narrative. There are, rising anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic voices, big influencers, but, their influence in America has totally dropped off. And I know it's hard to see that from Israel. You have to imagine, like, YouTube comments, or podcast downloads are not just in America, they're global. And there are 2 billion Muslims on this planet, many of whom are very hungry for, highly produced, high quality anti-Israel content. And I think that a lot of the biggest names in America who have turned on Israel or turned on the Jewish people I don't think their audience is American anymore. I don't see their influence. I don't see their videos getting shared.
Like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Theo Vaughn, the platform that Joe Rogan gives to anti-Semites,
Yeah.
Marjorie Taylor Greene, Steve Bannon's harsh criticism of Netanyahu. I mean, it does seem that it's not only on the fringes anymore.
It's very interesting because when Trump was deciding to bomb Iran, there was like this clear divide among the influencers on the right. And it was between an isolationist wing and then the kind of more neoconservative wing. And Trump really said no to both. He said, we're not going to do regime change that the right wants, the neoconservative right wants, but we're not going to do like isolationism and just drop Israel the way that the isolationists are asking me to do. He picked this sort of center, the real Trump doctrine of peace through strength. And he said, we're going to bomb Iran and not get into a war. Like, we're going to be like anti-war but pro-Israel. And that's really where the American right is at, in that center. And you could see which of the podcasters had influence and which ones didn't, because the ones who had influence got invited to the White House for lunch. And the ones who didn't have influence had to call Trump themselves. And this became very clear in the aftermath. And the same thing happened around Israel, and the same thing happened around Jeffrey Epstein. There's a lot of, influencers who have very little influence. And I know it's hard to see that, but when you walk the streets of America, you go to events, you talk to people, you see who people are allowing to influence them. It's not Candace Owens. It was Charlie Kirk, who was unbelievably pro-Israel, like to his core, and holding off a lot of that right-wing energy.
And I want to talk to you a bit about how Israel is losing ground with young Republicans. According to recent polls, it's quite striking. 50% of Republicans under 50 now say they don't have a positive view of Israel. Only 48% say they do. And that's compared to 63% just 3 years ago. How do you read this trend inside the Republican Party among the younger people?
That's about aid. They're sick of paying for aid to other countries. If Israel did what I think it should, which is develop its own military industrial complex and just say no to the free cash, that would change very quickly. That's about aid. They love Israel. They want Jews to be in charge of Christian holy sites. Like that's, and at Charlie Kirk's last event with about 7,000 young people, 75% of them said they're pro-Israel, but they don't want to pay the aid anymore, and that's their prerogative. They can't afford homes. Like it's okay for them to say we don't really see what we get out of it. We get a lot out of it, but if they don't see it, that's like totally fine
So
for them to say. I
it's
think,
more about America first than
yeah,
about their
yeah,
approach to Israel, the way you said.
yeah. And even when they are, not so pro is, Israel's fighting a controversial war, and that war will end, God willing, very soon. And a lot of this will change. Not on the left, I don't think, but it'll change on the right. People on the right, even ones who are less positively inclined towards Israel right now, they're still very protective of the Jewish people. I think it's very important to allow people the space to be critical of a controversial war, even if we support it.
Of course. I mean, as an Israeli journalist, I would
As an
say
Israeli,
Israeli
yeah,
media is,
right.
very critical of this war, certainly for the past year or so. I think Israel should be criticized. It just should be criticized fairly. Okay, Batya, we've reached the final part of our conversation, the Jewish Crossroads Questionnaire. 5 quick and fun questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
What's your earliest Jewish memory?
I remember my mom dressing me for Shabbos. I must have been like 2 or 3 years old.
If you could meet any Jewish figure from history, ancient or modern, who would it be and why?
King David.
Why?
Everything. I mean, the combination of being like a warrior poet. He had a very erotic relationship with God, and I would want to know what that was like. He admitted very publicly when he was wrong. He was a great king, and but then also not. He was sometimes a very complicated slash bad person. He had to experience his children turning on him. Everything. I mean, he had it all.
What is your favorite or most meaningful Jewish tradition?
We host a lot of people on Shabbat almost every week. It's very, very meaningful to me. And also have to say mikvah, I think, is a very, very meaningful thing. Again, on this theme of having this erotic relationship with the divine, which is something that is the hardest thing to explain to people who are not Jewish, like that this is a big part of our culture and our tradition and our history, and it really protects you. It protects you from that thing of like you have to face yourself in the mirror, and it gives you like a almost like a invulnerability.
If you could jump 100 years into the future, what would you hope to see for the Jewish people?
Unity, 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 unity.
What's one Jewish word? It could be Hebrew, English, Yiddish, otherwise, that feels particularly meaningful to you right now.
Can it be two?
You got it.
Leman Shemo.
Okay, and it's behind you as we speak as well. Why is it there?
To remind me why I do this.
Batya, it's been such a pleasure having you on our podcast. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's it for this episode of Jewish Crossroads. We'd love to hear from you, so feel free to write to us at jewishcrossroadspod@gmail.com. Thank you to Tomer Bar, who edited this chapter. We'll see you next time, same place, same journey, with a new voice. See you soon.